Hello to all you unbound heroes and uncaged villains. Welcome to another visual guide dedicated to helping fellow players such as yourself. Today we'll take a look at Terrarium ELITE, an 8-player elite level raid introduced through the Shock to the System DLC. My name is Star and I'll be your guiding light. Team comps I would recommend for this raid would be 2 healers, 1 tank, 1 controller, and 4 DPS. You could even drop a healer for another DPS if you're feeling spicy. If your tank is incapable of solo tanking the raid, then you can drop a healer for another tank, and use a team consisting of 2 tanks, 1 healer, 1 controller, and 4 DPS. This team comp definitely makes the static and rocket fight much easier, but it's pretty much a waste on the other bosses. But I believe most tanks that play in a run elite should be able to solo tank the raid easily. Quick tip before we start, the bosses in this raid have a lot of mechanics that have quick animations and can be hard to quickly read. I recommend maintaining as many shields as you can, whether it be party shields or personal shields. Now let's get into it. Teams will have to deal with a few waves of parademon adds before every boss fight. The first fight of the instance will be Nightmare, Static, and Rocket. This fight involves a lot of AoE damage, so teams will need to stay spread out to avoid wipes. Both bosses will need to die within seconds of each other. If not, then the boss who was defeated first will revive with a significant amount of health. While you're dealing with all the boss mechanics of the raids, healers will need to stay on their toes, as the side uses Relentless Misery throughout the entire raid, which is a room-wide AoE. So healers will need to be ready at all times to heal the group from this unavoidable damage to the party. I'll discuss both bosses individually, but before I do that, we need to discuss the kinetic domes. Throughout the fight, Static and Rocket will begin to do the headache and moat and become invulnerable. During this time, a kinetic dome will appear in one of the 4 corners of the room. Make your way inside the dome and wait out the following room-wide explosion. Failing to make it inside the dome in time will result in a KO. And please, for all that is holy, move to the back of the dome and don't stand directly in front and potentially body block someone trying to get in. I can't tell you how many times I've died during this because everyone cluttered the front of the dome. Okay, ran over. Back to it. Nightmare Static is the first boss we'll focus on. His 2 big mechanics will be Taser Punch and Electrostatic Shield. Coupled with an audio cue and an on-screen prompt to block, Static will choose a target and punch them. If the punch isn't blocked, then the group will be hit by Electro Taser Blast, which will most likely KO everyone. Static will usually choose the current player who has his aggro, which should be the tank. But everyone should block just in case he either doesn't choose the tank for whatever reason or the tank doesn't successfully block. If you're a solo tank, then I would suggest you using your breakout ability before blocking to avoid being block broken or CC'd by Rocket. His second big mechanic is Electrostatic Shield. Static will give out an audio cue and raise his arm in the air before taking a blocking stance. Hitting him during this time will deal out heavy damage to the target. To be honest, it's pretty much a one-shot if you hit him. If you're solo tanking, then once he begins showing signs of going into his blocking stance, move Rocket away from him so the group can continue to burn her down while they wait for Static to be vulnerable again. Lightning Ball and Spark Barrage have the same animation of Static waving his hands in front of him, but he will throw damaging projectiles in front of him for both attacks. Static will place a dot on the target with electric overload. It will look like yellow electricity around the player, as well as summoning a storm cloud above the target. This can spread to other players, so be careful about where you're standing if affected. Static has a damaging pool where he will hold his hand out, break out and quickly get away from him if affected. Static Push will have Static sending out a damaging shockwave in front of him. This is a close to mid-ranged ability, so if you're far away from Static, you'll be fine. Static will send out Arc Lightning at a target that will arc out to nearby players. Voltaic Blast is a quick lightning strike on targeted players within range. Static will float in the air just like the animation for the Word of Power ability before doing the attack. This attack will deal out AoE damage, so everyone needs to spread out to avoid stacking the damage. Now we'll take a look at Rocket. Rocket will focus on damaging CC against the team. Rocket's major mechanic will be Kinematic Levitation. Rocket will place purple auras on everyone. This will place a dot on everyone, followed by the players in her range being levitated into the sky. Everyone will also have a damaging AoE explode from them. The way we deal with this mechanic is having everyone spread out to avoid stacking the AoE explosions on top of each other. Healers should be keeping up those shields and heals to mitigate the damage from the dot and explosions. And most importantly, players who are levitated must avoid their habits and not break out of the CC. Breaking out will cause the explosion to happen faster, damaging yourself and nearby teammates. If you're one of the players caught in the levitation, just allow the animation to play through and wait till you drop to the floor and block. Rocket will target a player and place fear gas on them. This can stun the affected player and will damage the target over time as well as damage nearby players. A player will be targeted for stasis field, which will stun and encase the player while dealing damage initially and applying a dot. Kinetic Burst will place a pink field around Rocket as she pulls players in towards her. This attack will damage affected players while leaving a dot. Break out of this quickly and move back out of range, as she may follow this attack up with Kinetic Surge or Kinetic Shard, which are 2 attacks that deal area damage in front of her. Gauss Grenade, Vortex Cannon, EMP Pulse, Cuff'em, and Paralyzing Dart are all damaging abilities, with a few of them having a CC effect. These attacks can be easily mitigated with shields and heals and staying far enough back from Rocket. These attacks are mostly AoE, so just spread out so you're not being hit with something that was meant for someone else. Static and Rocket will continue these mechanics until defeated. The second boss of the raid will be Apocalyptian Nightmare. This boss will transform throughout the fight, and you can only see 4 of the 5 possible transformations per run. Every transformation has different mechanics, but they all share 3 mechanics: Scornful Blast, Nightmare Pools, and Nightmare Void. Scornful Blast will have orbitals drop down on all players. Move out of the way of the blast to avoid the damage. Pools of nightmares will spawn around the map. Standing in these pools will damage the affected player and spawn Nightmare Parademon adds. These adds will continue spawning from the pool as long as someone is standing in them, even if they're KO'd. Nightmare Void will spawn orbs in various spots around the room. There will usually only be 2 orbs at a time. If these orbs are not interacted with by someone, someone, then they will explode, resulting in a group wipe. Players standing in range of the orb will also take damage over time, but this damage will not interrupt your interaction with the orb. Don't worry if a scornful blast is placed on you while interacting with the orb, as you will take reduced damage from scornful blast while interacting with Nightmare Void. Nightmare Void will also continue into the next boss as well. Apocalyptian Nightmare will usually start this fight off as Clown Sanity, so that's the form we'll look at first. Ground Pound is an attack where Clown Sanity punches the ground, dealing damage around him. Just make sure you're standing away from him at all times if you're a non-tank player, and you'll be fine. Clown Sanity will target a player with Spinaroo. He will smash the ground near the player. If the targeted player isn't blocking, then Clown Sanity will stun them before grabbing them and spinning them around the room before throwing the player across the room. Any players hit by the spinning attack will take heavy damage and will be knocked back, so avoid standing near him while he spins. The Babyface transformation is easily dealt with by staying at a safe range. Jump Shot is an attack where Babyface jumps to a target, dealing AoE damage once it lands. ICU is an attack where Babyface places an explosion on a player, dealing damage to players with a knockback. Babyface will sometimes have a red skull icon before putting its arms up and then shooting out flames. As long as you're not standing too close to Babyface, you'll avoid this damage. Steel is another form of Apocalyptian Nightmare. Steel will target a player with lunging strike and then fly towards the player at high speeds. Not blocking the attack will result in a KO. You can tell who the target is by who Steel is looking at when the red skull icon appears above his head, so stay on the lookout the entire time he's active. Steel will throw his hammer at whoever has his aggro with hammering. Anyone in the path of his hammer will take damage and be knocked back. He can be lunged to interrupt the toss. Vengeful Displacement is a melee ranged AoE. Just make sure you're not standing too close to him at any point to avoid this attack. Grail is another form of Apocalyptian Nightmare. Avoid using supply drops, as this will cause Grail to lunge towards a supply drop and do a heavily damaging spin attack on the location. Grail will display a red skull icon before taking a blocking stance. Attacking Grail while she's blocking will reflect the damage and knock players back, so avoid attacking her the same way you did with Nightmare Static. Grail will teleport through a boom tube and attack with a frontal cone attack signaled by a red cone on the ground. She will also throw her spear at her target, which can be interrupted by lunging her. Avoid standing in front of Grail during this time to avoid the damage. Supergirl is the last form we'll discuss. Hold Breath is a red skull attack where Supergirl will spin around while using Frost Breath. Stand away from her to avoid the damage, otherwise you'll be frozen and damaged. Whirlwind is another red skull attack where Supergirl spins around in a circle, dealing damage to players and drawing them in. Booyah is a charge attack where she targets a player with a dash. You can know who her target is by paying attention to who she's looking at when she goes into the air. Block this attack or move out of the way. The final boss of the raid will be Decide. As I said earlier, the Nightmare Voids will appear throughout this boss as well, so stay vigilant, heroes and villains. Decide will spawn ads throughout this fight alongside Nightmare Decide. The Parademon Summoner ads are a high priority as they summon other ads and can quickly overwhelm teams if they're left to their own devices. Nightmare Decide is also a high priority as he does a damaging charge that can KO hit players. Mega Rod, Multi Blast, and Theta Blast are beams Decide will shoot at targeted players. Healers should be ready to shield and heal the damage from these attacks. Overwhelming Terror is a purple AoE Decide puts on players that will damage the targets over time. This attack can spread to other players, causing them to be stunned and panic while damaging them, so stay spread out while this is happening. Decide will put a grid on the ground with symbols and different blocks coupled with an on-screen prompt. Every player will have a symbol above their head. Match the symbol that's above your head to the one on the ground and stay in that section. Not standing in the right section will result in a KO. These mechanics will repeat until he's defeated. And thanks for watching, everyone. Please let me know if you've enjoyed this guide and leave a thumbs up if it's helped you out. And if you're interested in staying up to date with all the latest DCUO guides from me, then subscribe to the channel. See ya.